Was knotting my tie in the bathroom mirror when my phone buzzed on the counter. I figured it was my son asking if I needed directions again. He'd been doing that lately, slipping it into conversation like it was nothing. "Dad, you sure you remember how to get here?" Like I hadn't driven those roads for 30 years. I was 68 years old. I'd spent 4 decades as a forensic accountant, tracking money through shell companies and offshore accounts that would make your head spin. "But sure, son, let me double-check the exit." The preview text on my screen stopped me cold. It was from my oldest friend, a man I'd known since we were both 22 years old and working our first jobs at the same firm in Cincinnati. He wasn't the type to text in capital letters. He wasn't the type to text in all, usually. He called, always called, in that measured way of his. The message read, "Don't go inside that house tonight. I need you to call me before you walk through that door." This is not a joke, Walter. My name isn't Walter. He'd been calling me that since 1979, a running joke I'd long stopped trying to explain. When he used it in the message like this, it meant he was dead serious. I sat down on the edge of the bed. My dress shirt was still half unbuttoned. My granddaughter's photo was on the nightstand. She was 7, gap-toothed, holding up a finger painting she'd made for me. I'd driven 4 hours from Columbus to be there for my son's dinner party tonight. He'd called it a celebration, said he and his wife wanted to do something special for my upcoming birthday. I dialed my old friend back. He answered before it rang twice. "Don't say anything yet," he said. "Just listen to me." He told me he'd been at the county courthouse that afternoon, filing some paperwork for a client. An old colleague of his who worked in the probate division had flagged something. A petition had been submitted 3 days ago. Emergency guardianship. The petitioner was my son. The respondent, the person being declared legally incompetent, was me. I didn't speak for a long moment. "They have a doctor lined up," he said. "Someone named Dr. Pritchard. According to the filing, he's supposed to conduct a cognitive evaluation tonight at the dinner." I looked at myself in the mirror across the room. 68 years old, gray at the temples, still sharp enough to have caught 4 separate embezzlement schemes in the last decade of my career. My hands were steady. My mind was clear. "What grounds?" I asked. He read from the document. Memory lapses. Dangerous behavior. Leaving the stove on. Getting lost while driving. Failure to manage finances responsibly. They had a signed statement from my daughter-in-law saying she'd witnessed me become confused and agitated at a family gathering 2 months ago. I remembered that gathering. I'd questioned why my son had refinanced his house for the 3rd time in 8 years. My daughter-in-law had told me it wasn't my business. I disagreed. Apparently that was agitation. If you walk in there and seem confused at all, if you mispronounce something, if you forget a name, if you take a sip of wine and seem slow, that doctor will sign an affidavit tonight, he said. They could have a court order by morning. "I'm going," I said. "That's what I was afraid you'd say. I need to hear it. I need to see their faces. You need a lawyer is what you need." "I have one. I'll call you after." I hung up and sat there for a minute. My son, my only child. I'd paid off his first car. I'd co-signed his mortgage. When his restaurant failed in 2016, I quietly wired him $40,000 and told him not to mention it to anyone because I didn't want him to feel ashamed. He'd said, "Thank you, Dad. I'll pay you back." He never brought it up again. I went to the closet and reached past my good suits to the back shelf. An old digital recorder, the kind I used to carry to client interviews 20 years ago. Compact, inconspicuous, good for 6 hours. I checked the battery. Full. I slipped it into the inside breast pocket of my jacket. Then I put on my oldest cardigan over it, the brown one with the pulled thread at the cuff. I looked soft in it. Harmless. That was the point. The drive to their house in Dublin took 40 minutes. My son and his wife lived in a colonial on a half-acre lot, the kind of house that said success to everyone passing by on the street. They'd bought it 5 years ago. They drove a Suburban and a BMW. They took the kids to Florida every spring break. To look at them, you'd think everything was perfectly fine. I knew their credit card debt was north of $60,000. My son had told me reluctantly 6 months ago. He'd said they were working on it. He'd said things were tight but manageable. I parked in the driveway and sat for a moment. I let my shoulders drop. I let my face go a little blank, the way tired men look when they've been driving too long. Then I got out of the car and walked slowly to the front door. My daughter-in-law opened it before I knocked. There he is. She smiled too wide. She always smiled too wide when she wanted something. We were starting to wonder, did you have trouble finding us? The GPS kept trying to send me down 161, I said, letting my voice trail off vaguely. I think I missed a turn somewhere. She exchanged a look over her shoulder with my son, who was coming down the hallway. It was quick, barely a second, but I'd spent 40 years watching people try to hide things, and I caught it. My son hugged me. He smelled like the expensive bourbon he couldn't actually afford. Dad, good to see you. Come on in. I want you to meet someone. The living room had been arranged with care, good lighting. The fireplace was going. My granddaughter was upstairs. I could hear cartoon sounds drifting down. On the sofa sat a man I didn't recognize, about 55, in a blazer and pressed slacks. His eyes moved over me the way a mechanic looks at a car that's been brought in for assessment. Dad, this is Dr. Pritchard, my son said. He's an old friend of Claire's from grad school. He happened to be in Columbus this week. I extended my hand. Nice to meet you. Dr. Pritchard's handshake was one of those testing grips. Firm, held a beat too long, watching for how I reacted. I let my own grip be slightly loose. A little uncertain, I met his eyes just slightly off-center, the way someone might if they weren't quite tracking the moment. Your son tells me you were an accountant, he said warmly, settling back. I said, easing into the armchair they'd placed slightly apart from the main seating. Long time ago now. Numbers were never really my strong suit, to be honest. I smiled faintly like I was making a small joke at my own expense. He wrote something on the small notepad balanced on his knee. My son brought me a glass of water. Not wine. Water in a heavy glass that he set down just a little too carefully in front of me, like he was testing whether I'd knock it over. How's the drive from Columbus? My daughter-in-law asked. Oh, fine, I said. I always get a low turned around on 270, the interchanges. I shook my head slowly. Seems like they keep changing things. They hadn't changed anything on 270 in 12 years. Dr. Pritchard leaned forward slightly. Do you drive much on your own? When I need to, I said. Then I paused as if searching. Sometimes I take the bus. Easier not to think about parking. I had never taken a bus in Columbus. I owned my home outright and parked in a heated garage. My daughter-in-law asked if I'd eaten. I said I wasn't sure, that I'd had something around noon maybe. She nodded with practiced concern. She went to the kitchen and came back with a small plate, crackers, some cheese, the kind of snack you'd put out for a child or someone you didn't want to give a real drink to. She set it in front of me without asking. We'll eat soon, my son said. We're just waiting for the pasta to finish. We sat in the living room for another 20 minutes. Dr. Pritchard asked questions that sounded like small talk. What year did I retire? Did I keep in touch with old colleagues? Did I have trouble sleeping? I answered each one a half beat slow, like the words were coming from somewhere slightly distant. I mentioned a colleague's name and then said, or was it someone else? I get them mixed up sometimes. My son was visibly relaxing. I could see it in the set of his shoulders. Dinner was in the formal dining room, which they only used when they wanted to impress someone. The table was set with their wedding china. Everyone had real glassware except me. At my place, there was a heavy plastic tumbler, the kind they sold at stadium concession stands. My daughter-in-law caught me looking at it and said brightly, "We thought that would be easier for you, just in case." I looked at the tumbler. I looked at my son. He was cutting into a steak and didn't meet my eyes. In case of what exactly? I'd never dropped a glass in my life. My hands were steadier than his. I picked up the tumbler and took a sip of water. Thank you, I said. That was thoughtful. Dr. Pritchard set his fork down. You know, it's wonderful that your family looks out for you this way. They're good kids, I said. I let my voice go a little warm and fuzzy. I don't know what I'd do without them, honestly. It gets hard to keep track of things. He nodded. He wrote something down. My son cleared his throat. Dad, we've actually been wanting to talk to you about something. About the house. My house was a 4-bedroom in Bexley that I'd owned free and clear for 11 years. The neighborhood had gentrified significantly. The house was worth somewhere around $600,000 at current market rates. The house, I repeated, letting my eyebrows lift slowly like I was trying to locate the concept. We've been worried about you there alone, my daughter-in-law said. All that space and the maintenance. It's a lot for one person. There's a place called Meadow Ridge, my son said, and the name dropped into the room like a stone into still water. It's a senior community. Very nice. We took a tour. I knew Meadow Ridge. I'd driven past it. It was a state-assisted care facility on the east side of Columbus, cited twice in the last 4 years by the Ohio Department of Health for inadequate staffing. The waiting list for private rooms was 18 months long. The alternative was a shared room. Is that near the park? I asked. I let my face go pleasant and vague. I like a park. There's a courtyard, my daughter-in-law said quickly. Very pretty. My granddaughter appeared in the doorway then, in her pajamas, holding a stuffed rabbit. She looked at me. Then she looked at her parents. Then back at me. Grandpa, she said, are you going to live in the old people place? The table went silent. Sweetie, my son said, his voice dropping. We talked about this. Go back upstairs. But you said after dinner Grandpa was going to sign the papers and then he'd go upstairs. His voice was sharp. My granddaughter startled, clutched her rabbit, and disappeared. I stared at my plate. Sign the papers. They'd already printed them. They brought me here to sign something tonight. Dr. Pritchard was writing steadily now. I looked up at my son. His jaw was tight. He wouldn't meet my eyes. My daughter-in-law was refilling her wine glass with a hand that wasn't quite steady. What papers? I asked softly. I let my voice sound confused and a little frightened. Are there papers about the park? It's nothing to worry about, the park. It's nothing to worry about, my son said. Just some forms. To help us help you, so we can talk to your doctors, take care of things when you need us to. Power of attorney. I would bet the house, my house, that was exactly what was sitting in the manila folder I'd noticed on the entryway table when I walked in. I nodded slowly. That sounds nice, I murmured. I do forget things. My daughter-in-law reached over and patted my hand. Her fingers were cold. I excused myself to use the restroom. My son started to rise. I can show you. And I waved him off. I remember where it is. I walked down the hallway with my shuffle, turned the corner, and then stood up straight. I had maybe 4 minutes. I passed the bathroom and went to the small home office at the end of the hall. The door was half open. I slipped inside. My son's laptop was open on the desk. I tapped the touchpad. A password screen appeared. I tried the password he used for everything. His college football team's name plus his graduation year. I knew because he'd asked me to check something on his computer 8 years ago and handed it to me already unlocked after typing it in front of me. It worked. His email was open. I searched for Meadow Ridge. The first result was a confirmation email. Thank you for reserving a private room at Meadow Ridge Senior Community. Occupancy date pending court authorization. It was dated 4 days ago. They'd already reserved the room. Before they'd even had the dinner. I searched for the name of the mortgage company. There were 47 emails from a collections firm called Hargrove Capital. The most recent one was 2 days old. Mr. Devlin, your account is 91 days past due. The outstanding balance of $387,000 on your home equity line of credit must be resolved before foreclosure proceedings commence. My son had taken out a home equity line against the Dublin house, $387,000, and he was 91 days past due. He needed my Bexley house to cover it. That was what this was. I took photographs of the emails. I photographed the Meadow Ridge reservation. I found one more folder, labeled with my name and a date from 8 months ago. Inside was a letter, supposedly written by me, to my son's financial planner. authorizing a change of beneficiary on my life insurance policy. My son's wife's name had been added. My signature was at the bottom. I had never written that letter. I'd never authorized any change. The signature was close enough that a busy probate judge might not look twice. But the loop on the lowercase g was wrong. I knew because I'd spent 20 years signing documents and analyzing other people's signatures. I took 4 photographs from different angles. I heard footsteps in the hallway. I closed the laptop, moved to the bookshelf, and pulled out the first book I touched. I stood there with it open, staring at the page, as the door opened. My daughter-in-law stood in the frame. Her eyes went to the laptop, then to me. "The bathroom's down the..." "I got turned around," I said. My voice was soft and bewildered. I looked at the book in my hands. I was looking at the spines. "Your husband used to have this one. Or someone did." I shook my head gently as if dislodging a fog. "Do you have a restroom nearby, Annie?" She stared at me for a long moment. Then the tension in her shoulders dropped by degrees. She saw exactly what she expected to see. A confused old man standing in the wrong room, holding a book he wasn't reading. "Right this way," she said, and her voice had gone back to warm and condescending. I followed her. I used the restroom. I washed my hands and looked at myself in the mirror above the sink. My eyes were sharp as tacks. My pulse was normal. I had everything I needed. When I came back to the table, dessert had been set out. Slices of grocery store cake, the kind you pick up without thinking. My son was at the head of the table with a manila folder next to his plate. He opened it while I was sitting down, not making a production of it, just casual. Inside were several pages. He uncapped a pen. "Dad, while we're all together, this is just paperwork for your doctor visits, so Claire and I can be looped in. Standard stuff." He slid it across the table. "Sign wherever you see an X." I reached for the pages. He covered the header text with his palm, casually, the way you might rest your hand on a table. But I already knew what it was: durable power of attorney. And below it, almost certainly, a medical proxy form that would give them the authority to consent to institutional placement. I picked up the pen. I held it over the first signature line. My hand began to tremble. Slowly at first, then in wide arcs. The pen skidded across the paper, leaving a wild scrawl through the line. I made a small noise of distress. "Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I don't know why my hand..." My son grabbed the page back. He stared at the scratch mark through the signature line. His face went still. "It's all right," Dr. Pritchard said smoothly. "We can print another copy. But given what I've observed tonight, I think we have more than enough for the declaration." He looked at my son. "I'll have the affidavit ready in the morning." My daughter-in-law was looking at me with something I recognized as pure calculation. "We'll take you home tonight, Dad," she said. "Then tomorrow we'll come pick you up and we'll all go to the attorney's office together." I nodded meekly. "All right," I said. "That sounds fine. Will there be coffee?" My son drove me back to my car. He walked me to the driver's side door, put his hand on my arm. "I love you, Dad," he said. "This is the right thing. You'll be comfortable there." I nodded. I got in my car. I watched him walk back into the house. I sat in the dark for 30 seconds. Then I took out my recorder and pressed stop. I called my old friend from the driveway. He picked up before the first ring finished. "I have audio of the whole dinner," I said. "I have photographs of emails, including one from a collections firm saying he's 91 days past due on a $387,000 HELOC. I have a forged letter on file with his financial planner changing my life insurance beneficiary. And I have a photograph of a room reservation at Meadow Ridge made 4 days ago." Silence for a moment. "You need to come to my office at 7 tomorrow morning," he said. "I'll be there at 6:30. I drove home. I didn't turn the radio on. I thought about my son as a child. The year he broke his arm falling out of the oak tree in the backyard. How he'd held my hand in the emergency room and said he wasn't scared because I was there. I thought about the week his mother died. How he'd sat in my kitchen and wept until there was nothing left, and I'd made coffee and just sat with him. Because that was all there was to do. I thought about the letter with the forged signature, The grief that had been pressing against my sternum since the phone call that afternoon finally arrived. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet and cold and absolute. Something ended in me on that drive home. I felt it go. I was in my home office by 10:30. I took out a fresh legal pad. I wrote down every asset I held: the Bexley house, the brokerage account, the municipal bond ladder I'd been building for 12 years, the small rental property in Westerville I'd purchased in 2009 and never told anyone about because it had been a stretch at the time and I'd been embarrassed. That rental was worth $190,000 now, clear title, generating $1,400 a month in rent deposited into an account my son had never heard of. I wrote down everything he owed. Then I made 2 phone calls. The first was to my attorney. The second was to the Property Records Office's online portal where I looked up the title on my son's Dublin house. I was not prepared for what I found. The Dublin house, the one where we'd had dinner, the one where my granddaughter's drawings were pinned to the refrigerator, was not owned by my son. The deed listed the owner as a limited liability company called Cedar Ridge Holdings, registered in Delaware. I searched the registration. The member of record was me. I had formed Cedar Ridge Holdings in 2003 and forgotten about it entirely. I had used it to purchase the Dublin property as an investment, intending to sell it within 5 years. Then my son's first marriage had fallen apart and his second wife was pregnant and he needed somewhere stable, and I'd let them move in and we'd never discussed ownership because at the time it had seemed unkind to make it a transaction. They had lived in my house for 11 years and convinced themselves it was theirs. My son had taken out a home equity line of credit against a property he did not own. The bank had issued $387,000 against a forged or falsified deed. I sat back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. My old friend called me at 1 in the morning. His title search had confirmed it independently. "You own the house," he said. "I know," I said. "They don't know you own the house." "No. Walter," he said, "do you understand what's in your hands right now?" I understood completely. The next morning, I was at his office at 6:30. By 8 o'clock, we had filed a motion to dismiss the emergency guardianship petition on grounds of bad faith and fraudulent evidence. We had served notice to Dr. Pritchard that his affidavits being challenged and that evidence of coordinated fraud had been submitted to the Ohio Medical Board. We had notified Hard Row Capital that the collateral they held on the HELOC, the Dublin house, was improperly titled and that the lien was therefore invalid, as the signatory had no ownership interest. We had also drafted a notice of lease termination for the Dublin property. My son called me at 9:15. I let it go to voicemail. He called again at 9:22. At 9:30, his wife called from a number I didn't recognize. I let that go too. At 10 o'clock, my attorney called them. He told me later that my son went very quiet when he explained the ownership situation. That my daughter-in-law had made a sound my attorney described as something between a gasp and a word she thought better of. I was not in the room. I did not need to be. My granddaughter called me that afternoon. She'd gotten my number off her mother's phone, which I knew because she said, "Mommy doesn't know I'm calling." She asked if I was okay. She asked if she was going to have to move. I told her I would see her soon. I told her everything was going to be fine, and with her, I meant it. There was a meeting the following week. My son and his wife came. They came without an attorney because theirs had withdrawn, citing a conflict of interest when he received the documentation of the forged letter. My old friend sat beside me. Across the table, my son looked like a man who hadn't slept in 7 days. My daughter-in-law sat with her arms crossed and her eyes fixed on the table in front of her, which told me everything about who had been the architect of all this. I didn't speak for the first 10 minutes. I let my attorney lay out the situation methodically, the way you'd read the terms of a bridge stress test. The forged letter. The HELOC against property they didn't own. The emergency guardianship petition based on manufactured evidence. The affidavit from a physician paid to observe a performance. My son's chin dropped toward his chest somewhere around the third item. When it was done, I folded my hands on the table. I looked at my son. "I want to ask you something," I said, "and I want you to understand that I already know most of the answer. I just want to hear it from you." He looked at me. His eyes were red. "Were you planning to come visit me at Meadow Ridge?" I asked. "After. Once I was settled." He didn't answer. That was the answer. That was the answer. My daughter-in-law started to say something about good intentions, about being worried, about how things had gotten out of hand. I held up one hand and she stopped. "I'm not interested in the story you've prepared," I said. "I'm interested in what happens next." What happened next was this. The guardianship petition was dismissed with prejudice. Dr. Pritchard surrendered his request to testify. My old friend filed a formal complaint with the Ohio Medical Board, which launched its own inquiry. Hargrove Capital discovered that their HELOC collateral was worthless and began proceedings against my son for fraud. I did not press criminal charges, not because they didn't deserve it, but because my granddaughter's last name was the same as mine, and I wanted her to grow up without that. What I did do was exercise my rights as property owner. My son and his wife had 60 days to vacate the Dublin house. I was reasonable about the timeline because of my granddaughter. I was not reasonable about anything else. I sold the Dublin house 8 months later for $840,000. The market had been good to it. I put a portion of the proceeds into a trust for my granddaughter. Tuition, graduate school, first home, whatever she needed. It was irrevocable and professionally administered, and her parents could not touch it. My granddaughter came to stay with me for 2 weeks the following summer. She slept in the guest room and left her shoes in the middle of the hallway, and ate cereal for dinner twice because I let her, and we watched 3 movies past her bedtime because I let her do that too. She asked me one evening why her parents had been so upset last year. I told her that sometimes grown-ups make choices out of fear that they wouldn't make if they stopped to think. She considered that for a moment, and then asked if we could have ice cream. I said yes. I didn't forgive my son. I want to be honest about that because people always want that part of the story. The reconciliation, the hug at the end, the music swelling. It didn't happen. What happened was something quieter and more permanent. I stopped being his safety net. I stopped being his emergency fund. I stopped being the soft place he could fall when his choices caught up with him. I became someone he called on holidays and spoke to carefully, like a man who knows the ground beneath him is not as solid as it once was. That's not a punishment. That's just the truth finally taking up the space it should have had all along. I'm 69 now. I'm writing this from the sunroom of my Bexley house, the one I own outright, the one I've lived in for 22 years, the one no one is going to take from me. The coffee is strong, and the morning is quiet, and my granddaughter sent me a voice message yesterday that was mostly her laughing about something that happened at school, a story I couldn't quite follow because she was laughing too hard to finish it. I listened to it 4 times. If you're watching this and you have a parent, call them, not to check on them, just to talk, just to let them hear your voice without needing something in return. And if you have a parent like me, one who built quietly, who gave without keeping score, who loved you in the way that asks for nothing, please understand something before it's too late. That kind of love is not weakness. It is not confusion. It is not incompetence. It is the most expensive thing you will ever be given for free.